This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, all. This is Bill O'Brien, 9th District Councilman and Board of Ed Liaison Committee Chairman. And today is April 21st, 2021, and this is a special meeting of the committee. And the first thing I want to note is a correction, acknowledge a Scrivener's error for the record. It's CLA, not CLR. And as was mentioned by Jeff, it's Clifton Larson Allen LLP. And with that, I think we can just go right to Jeff and welcome Jeff Ziplo.
Thank you all very much, and I appreciate you giving us some time to provide some insight into our assessment and report as it relates to the Board of Ed. I'll call it financial analysis. I'm assuming most everyone had an opportunity to take a look at the report. So what I figured we would do, and then probably the best course of action, is I'm going to hit some highlights and then certainly respond to any questions that you have to the best of my ability. On the phone with me, I have one of the folks that worked with me. His name is William McCarthy, and he's on the call as well, just in case I can't answer a question, maybe William knows. So I do want to say thank you to both Susan and Pam. They did spend quite a bit of time with us, and their folks within their respective organizations spent time with us, and we had a very productive and fruitful session. So I do want to, before we get started, say thank you to them specifically. As part of our assessment, we were reviewing the financial activity within the school district for financial operations for fiscal years 17, 18, 18, 19, and 19, 20. We did take a look at and perform procedures to identify potential budget overages during those years. We reviewed and compared 3 years of budget to actual line items in quite a bit of detail, looked at the technologies that were used and put into practice, or are in practice, I should say. Looked at some internal control procedures and potential control weaknesses, and then developed this report, which helps to identify some findings, gaps, and equally as important recommendations. So that was kind of the overall scope of our work. As I mentioned, we most, if not all, of the work was done virtually. We were during the middle of the COVID pandemic, and so we were, unfortunately, I will say, doing most of this work virtually. But needless to say, it worked out well, and we did get a lot of very good information. So what I'd like to do is jump down to, and if you're following the report, I do want to jump down to page 6, because that does start off with talking about some of our findings and recommendations. And when we sat down with both Pam and Susan, we did recognize, and I want to bring it to everyone's attention, that there has been a new leadership structure within the Stratford School District. In particular, both Susan and Pam are relatively new to the organization. And one of the things that we learned, that we identified in the report, is that the prior chief operating officer would allow on a regular basis accounts to run into a deficit balance as long as the overall budget was not in a deficit position. And the reason I want to highlight this is for 2 reasons. One, that is not the case anymore. We've had a number of conversations with both Pam and Susan, and that's essentially not allowed. But it also gives you an indication of how deficits could have occurred in the past. And many times you wouldn't identify a deficit until it became, more apparent until the end of a school year. And so the way it stands right now, and we'll get into more of the details, but The current Chief Operating Officer does not allow deficit spending on individual accounts and requires the usage of budget transfers to maintain all accounts in a non-deficit state. And that helps, obviously, to mitigate any type of issues, account surprises, and it's something that is monitored on a regular basis. You're probably going to hear me use the term ALIO. ALIO is the school district's financial management system, and that's what's in place right now. And ALIO, is a tool that can help enhance some of the controls that we're talking about. So one of the things I can share with you is that, and one of our initial concerns was that ALIO was configured in such a way to allow for accounts to be in a deficit position. We did confirm with both Pam and Susan that that is not the case any longer, and that for the most part, ALIO is configured to not allow an account to be in a deficit position. There's maybe two exceptions. One exception is payroll, and I bring that up is because if we run into a deficit on a payroll account, we still need to process payroll, but then they'll go back and identify why the deficit occurred and certainly do an appropriate transfer. But payroll is payroll, and that needs to go out. And Pam and Susan, if I'm misstating anything, please feel free to chime in. I certainly welcome your input on this. One of the items we do want to make you aware of is that the concept of budget transfers. It is in place that budget transfers that are in excess of $7,500 need to go to the board for their approval. And I'll bring that up another time because we found some inconsistencies and as it relates to some of the budget transfers, or not confirmation that the budget transfers were being looked at on a regular basis in prior years, not currently, but in past years. So I'm going to be jumping over to actually on page 8, budget transfer control. So as I was mentioning, the school district has bylaws in place that requires the finance committee or the financial review planning committee to review changes in the operating budget that involve the reallocation of funds from one major category to another, and it requires any transfers that are above and beyond the 7,500 need to be brought to the BOE for review and approval. One of the things that we did find is that when we were reviewing meeting minutes for 17, 18, 19, and 19, 20, in our review of 17, 18, when we looked at the minutes, those minutes did not confirm identification or discussion of budget transfers. And so what we were looking for is any type of confirmation that said there is or is not a transfer for that particular month. And to be quite frank, there was significant inconsistencies. Many times they were not identified at all.
Jeff, can I just make a comment about that? It's Pam.
Yeah, please. Yep.
I just wanted to clarify just a couple of minor things. First, I want to just acknowledge that Susan Nicholson has actually been the glue that has kept our financial office at the Board of Ed together for at least the past decade. She has undergone and dealt with a lot of changes in my position as COO. And I think we can credit her with a lot of these outstanding best practices and processes that are in place. Having said that, we talked internally about the budget transfers and what is reflected in the board minutes. And I think the conclusion that we came to is obviously when Jeff is an auditor, looks at our minutes, he's going to the board meeting minutes, which is perfectly appropriate. The board process has been to take action and have specifics about those transfers in their finance committee meeting, and then sending that transfer as part of a consent agenda. So while I believe that we've taken the proper steps for approval, it was not properly reflected in the minutes. And we've spoken, we will definitely change the way we do that effective immediately. But I just wanted to clarify that one little bit, because I do think that the process overall has been a good one. Thanks.
Not a problem, and thank you, Pam. No, and what I did want to say is, the 1920 meeting minutes did confirm and identify, validated whether, or not there was a budget transfer and if it was approved or not. So I think from a recommendation perspective, we're pretty much saying the same thing. Get it in the minutes so that we can validate and confirm that budget transfers have been officially reviewed and appropriately approved as necessary. So one of the other things as it relates to the budget transfer process is, right now, the process is paper intensive. The budget transfer document gets reviewed and approved at various levels. And one of the things we were suggesting or thinking about is maybe we can use Alio, which is the financial management system, to automate the budget transfer process and to have it more visible in the system and more reflective in the system. And so that was a recommendation that we were making as part of our oral assessment. Okay. Moving down to, I'm going to talk about special ed expenditure tracking, and to be honest with you, special ed expenditures are a challenge for all communities in Connecticut. I guess that's the best way to describe it. It is not something that Stratford is the owner of, concerns and issues as it relates to expenditures with special education. It's across the board. We see it all the time in I'll say almost all, I can't say all, but almost all communities. The question is, how do we manage it and how do we track it? And I do want to say that Stratford does track and monitor, all costs of special ed services, and they do a relatively good job of it. During our assessment, one of the things that we identified is that most, but not all, expenditures are encumbered. And the comment and recommendation here is, to the best of your ability, all special ed expenditures should be encumbered as soon as possible. One of the challenges that a school district faces is that when a new special ed student comes on board during the middle of the year, they may have particular requirements that require them to, be outplaced to a facility. And, as we all know, there's some challenges in finding having the dollars, or not having budgeted the dollars for those type of situations. But whenever possible, get those encumbrances in place, and it may help identify issues, problems, potential deficits for the future. So please understand, I'm not suggesting anything is going on or there are any issues there, but to the best of your ability, from a school district perspective, just, we would highly recommend all encumbrances put in place as soon as possible. One of the things, and I'm turning to page 12, was the purchase order process. And I want to be very fair to Susan and Pam. There is a defined purchase order process within the school district. However, one of the things that we did note is that there are instances where purchase order protocols are not followed to the T. And what I mean by that is there have been instances where invoices have been received from a vendor, but there's no purchase order in place. and no one should be pointing the finger at a Pam or Susan because they can't control certain aspects. My point is when we put a purchase order in, we're encumbering money, and we need to make sure to the best of our ability that all users who do enter purchase orders recognize that it is up to them to get it in, the purchase order in as soon as possible and get it processed as soon as possible. Because that way we can just make sure that the appropriate controls are in place and that we don't receive invoices that that the purchases haven't been properly approved. And I'm going to stop there. Pam, did you have any thoughts or comments?
Yeah,
I see you nodding your head. So.
You don't know how near and dear to my heart that comment is. Everywhere I have ever been, this is always problematic, but I would like to share with both the town leaders and the board members that when I first arrived over the summer, that was one of the first conversations Susan and I shared, that it was very frustrating for her. And my mantra, which some people get tired of hearing, is that no one within the district has a right to financially commit the district without prior purchasing approval. And prior purchasing approval is obtained through an approved purchase order. So we are making a real effort to make certain that doesn't happen. And when it does, we're very adamant that it's not appropriate, and we're very strict about it because, as Jeff points out, and I know Don and Chris and anyone who deals with budgets is well aware, that if the monies are not encumbered and set aside and something shows up at the end of the year, it's extremely problematic. And we have actually been working very closely with the special ed office as well, as Jeff explained about special education encumbrances, and I think the office is doing a fabulous job. I'm constantly seeing emails to adjust this purchase order because this student left and went to another school, and there's ongoing circumstances where those particular expenses do change. But I just really wanted to impress the fact that Susan and I are definitely on board with that, and it's just interesting that it was one of the first conversations that we had, and we are trying really hard to get that process really adhered to. And we often blame the auditors for everything when we talk with our school administration and staff, but now we have it in writing. So I will be at administrator meetings, and we're hoping to also have a secretary's meeting before school starts, just to help them understand the importance of it. So thank you for that and for the opportunity.
And it is a culture shift, right? You know, yeah. It sounds like it was allowed in the past, and to be honest with you, it's not a good practice. And I know, Pam, you're nodding your head in agreement. So we do need to change the culture. I know that you're, working on that, and that's something that, to be quite frank, is not just a Stratford issue. When you go into other school districts across Connecticut and even outside of Connecticut, you run into those types of issues as well. So we just need to tweak it and get everyone on board with putting in purchase orders. One other item that I did want to cover is the application security. And I see that Vinny Fagella is on the line. Vinny, just a shout out, I haven't seen you in a number of years, but we worked together. Gosh, it's been a number of years ago, but one of the things we did find is that the security, the password security regarding Alio was not where we think it should be. Security is a big issue these days. I'm sure you all have heard about horror stories, and whatever we can do to enhance security, particularly in financial applications and other key applications, is very important. So one of the things we identified is passwords don't expire, and that some of the passwords are relatively weak. And so we made a recommendation here. There's a standard out there, NIST, which is National Institute of Standard and Technology. It's a standard out there, 863B actually, and just thought that it would be a good idea for Stratford to consider a higher level of security, password security as it relates to the financial management system. So,
and Jeff, if I could speak to that, I just want to let you know that we have already implemented one step where we're having passwords expire, but as of the end of this week, a new security password requirements are going to be in place.
awesome.
So.
Yep. So these are all great. You know, I'm glad that we're moving forward on a number of these initiatives, and all good to hear. I think it's the last time I'm going to just mention, and then certainly want to turn it over for questions. Is we had some review of the grant management procedures, and I do want to say that there are personnel are in place right now within the school district that do understand, the appropriate grant management processes, procedures, and controls. The one thing that we did note is that nothing is formalized, nothing is formally documented, and from a recommendation perspective, it's probably a good idea to get that documented, and so that as things change, as people change, everyone understands what those protocols are, what those controls are, that we need to follow in order to, appropriately manage grants. So with that, I'm going to stop here. We're getting towards the 5:30 timeframe, and I wanted to see if there were any questions.
Hey, Jeff, this is Bill O'Brien, and I'm just thinking that because of the time restraints here and the executive order by the governor that we have longer to approve the town budget, what do you think about having another special meeting with time dedicated to questions?
Sure, that's not a problem. Love to.
Okay,
I think I would like to anyway.
Yeah, I think that rather than us rushing through questions here, and I'm sure there are a number of questions, and maybe the Board of Ed staff have other information to add. So, I mean, I love what I've heard so far. Let me ask this one question. Based on your recommendations, do you see it, these changes helping save taxpayer money? Maybe that's a loaded question.
It's a loaded question. I'm not sure it's going to save money per se, but it will help to enhance and ensure that the appropriate controls are in place so that so that bad things don't happen. How about that?
Sounds good. Well, we have a few minutes. I don't
know. Bill, it's Greg Camp. Excuse me. Bill?
Sorry, I was
Bill?
back on mute. Yeah, keep it short, so we'll keep the long questions for the next meeting.
Yes. So I breezed through the report, and there's I guess the question is the scope of the work. Let's say efficiencies. Are we doing not? Is just the accounting correct, but are we processing the correct purchase order for the correct cost of goods? Meaning, are there more efficient, less expensive providers of various services that we could be identifying that we're not? But not in regards to the accounting, but in regards to, let's say, the decisions that result in a purchase or result in a hire, et cetera.
So we did not evaluate, are you purchasing from the right vendor? If I am interpreting your question appropriately, we looked at, the requisition process. We did not evaluate, should you be using Staples versus another vendor that you may be able to get it, cheaper. That was not really part of the project as we defined it.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So let's do this. Why don't we call this meeting to an end, or recess the meeting at 5:25, and we'll reconvene at a time to be determined that works best for you and William McCarthy.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for your
Okay.
time and have a great
Thank
rest
you.
of the day.
This